Today is Thursday, March the 7th. We hope you guys have had a great time. Just like we talked about on Sunday, we really hope that you guys are using your moments with other people to dialogue about what God is teaching you. This week we've been talking about the calling God has placed on all of us, right? So everything we've talked about, Adam's video a couple days ago, Jeremy's video yesterday, even today, we're just wrestling through what does our calling look like. And remember, we want to reframe it from your calling is not necessarily your job, but you can use your calling in your job to reach people, because all of our calling, just to remind us of this, is to make disciples who make more disciples. You're a disciple maker. I'm a disciple maker. We all do that, and how we live out that calling, though, looks a little different. So let's wrestle through the questions today together. First one is this: when you think of a person who is called by God, remember, we're all called by God to make disciples, what or who comes to mind?
Yeah, we were talking just a little bit about this before, because I don't know about you, but in my opinion, having done this for several weeks now, the first question is always the most difficult. It's the one that I have to think about a little bit. So you asked it a minute ago, you read it, and I said, man, I feel like I need to think of somebody famous, and there's famous people we can think of, I don't know.
No, like Mother Teresa,
Billy Graham. I mean,
all
people
these people
we can think of like that. But the one that comes to mind for me the most often, when I think of people that answered the call for God, it's actually back in Exodus 31. I looked it up a minute ago just to make sure I got it right. Exodus 31 verses 1 through about 5 or so talks about a guy named Bezalel. And God speaks and says, I've chosen Bezalel and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit of God. And obviously God's Spirit was at work before Exodus 31, right? But this is the first time that I think we recorded God filled someone with the Spirit. And then I'm always encouraged, because Bezalel, his job, his calling, was to build the tabernacle. He was a builder. He was filled with God's Spirit to do a task, and he did it. He finished it.
And I love how you put that, because he was a man who was a builder, and he was doing his best to glorify God through his building.
Yeah.
Right? And because of that, God pulled him aside and said, hey, I want you to use your talents and abilities that I gave you, that you've grown, as a way to honor me. I want you to build this tabernacle. And I think that would have, if I were him, I would have been so honored that the talents, the abilities, the giftings I know that God gave me, he asked for me to give it back to him as an honoring gift to him.
Yeah.
I think of different people like, and again, I said it on Sunday too, people like Alan Todd, and people like, there's pastors, there's missionaries you can pull aside, Aaron Shedd, and people like you who are watching this right now overseas. But I don't want to just point out people who are living as missionaries as their job, or people who are living as pastors as their job, because we're all called, right? We are all called to make disciples. So I also think about Adam. Last few weeks you've had Colton and Tiffany and these other people up on stage with you, just talking about how do I glorify God? How do I make disciples where God has placed me? Those are the people I think about when I think about the call of God, because it's beyond, again, just a job. It's beyond being pastors. It's beyond being missionaries. It's about remembering you are a disciple maker first and foremost, and then seeing where God has placed you to do that. Some of us, he's placed us in these roles of being pastors. Some of us, he's placed in roles of being missionaries. Some of you, though, he's placed at Sonic and Walmart, at the gas station, at your jobs. Some of you are in positions with city council members and different people that you are rubbing shoulders with. You are using those spaces to create disciples. And you shouldn't forget that. That's where God has sent you into. And I think about you all, actually. That's who comes to mind. Second question is, share about a time when you think God was speaking to you. Do you think God ever calls and we don't hear him, or refuse to respond? And what would it keep a person from hearing God's voice?
Sometimes I hear people say, man, I just wish God would speak out loud to me. Or just show up and just write on the wall, put writing on the wall. And I remind them, in the book of Daniel, God wrote on a wall.
And that wasn't a good thing.
It wasn't good. So you really don't want that, okay? But man, there's a couple times I can think of clearly in my life that I did. One time I was in high school. I was, 17, 18 years old. I'd had a bad car wreck. My sister was injured pretty badly, and I remember someone taking me aside and just kind of sharing with me right there that God's still the plan for my life. And I heard in that moment, I heard God speak to me and say, He's right. Because in that moment, I was on the verge. I was considering, like, am I gonna pursue serving God, or am I gonna do my own thing? What's gonna be? And in that moment, God spoke through a friend, through a mentor of mine. And there was that. There was another time I was about 21 years old or so, and I was overseas. I've been on a lot of mission trips, and I encourage you, by the way, side note, go on a mission trip. Join us in a future trip. This summer, Nino's trip's full already, but there'll be more, so join one of those. But I was actually in Pakistan, Islamabad, and I was sitting on the roof of the house we were staying in just one night, up there just thinking and praying a little bit, and all of a sudden, all across the city of Islamabad, all the calls to prayer from these Muslim places of worship went off, and I just felt like God told me right then. He's like, because I was having a hard time in that moment, and He said, "See, this is why you're here. This is the brokenness of the world that I came to bind up and to heal and to fix." And there's a few times like that. I felt God just speak to me. It's never been like a voice like that, but it's through people. It's through His Word. It's through my surroundings. God has done that.
Yeah, I mean, God speaks to me. I had a couple times I wanted to just point out. One time I remember clearly, I was a junior in high school, and up to that point, I was doing a really good job of living for me. But on Sundays and Wednesdays, looking like I was living for God. I grew up as a pastor's kid, so I knew all the right things to say to make people think that I knew what I was doing, and I was actually following Jesus when I was trying to live for me. And I remember going to church camp and actually laying flat on a concrete floor, and our youth pastor at the time said, "Hey, I just want you to imagine yourself in the presence of God. And you're in His throne room, and He's speaking to you, and what are the kinds of things He'd be saying to you?" And I just remember laying there and hearing God say, "Hey, what are you doing?" Like, what do you mean what am I doing? I'm here before you, God, you know? And in my head, I had this whole dialogue of God, and He just said, "I have something greater planned for you. And you said you wanted to do stuff for me. Why are you taking things in your own hands?" And I remember dialoguing and crying in front of God, like, "I'm sorry, you're right. And I've been purposely rebelling because I didn't want to obey you, right?" And having a moment of repentance and saying it's time to change the way I'm thinking, and it's time to act differently and to follow after God where He's called me. But I also, sometimes it talked about, does God call us and we don't hear and we refuse to respond? I remember for a long time refusing to respond to the call of God, even after being a pastor. And here's how that looked. My job and your job is to make disciples everywhere. I was really good at doing it in this building. And I was really good at doing it places I felt comfortable being in. But when I went home, I wanted to close the garage door and not leave my house. Because I'm more introverted than people think I am sometimes. But I was surrounded by a neighborhood that my wife kept calling me out saying, "Hey, we need to go meet neighbors. They need Jesus." I'm like, "Well, I'm tired. Well, this. Well, that." And I knew my calling. So do you, because we've already said it today, is to make disciples. Which means I need to know my neighbors. I need to know the people I'm working with. In this case, I work with you. But like my jobs, I need to know these people so I can be intentional in their lives and celebrate with them in good seasons, cry with them in hard seasons, and walk with them. And I was refusing to do that until my wife just started doing it without me, actually. Walking the neighborhood, meeting neighbors, and then I started walking with her. And I recognized that this is what I was called to do, and we ended up moving to a new neighborhood that we're actually our second campus, the North Heights neighborhood. I live there, and I remember a few weeks ago just sitting on my front porch having the same kind of moment you talked about as Islamabad, and that you were on the roof. I was sitting on my porch, and I hear kids are riding down the street. It was a nice day, so kids were riding down the streets on their bikes. People were talking not so nicely on porches to each other, next to each other. But I remember in that moment thinking the same thing. The harvest is plentiful. Yeah. This is where God's placed you. And up to that point, I had, not to that point, I'm sorry. Before that point, though, I'd learned that over the course of my life, it's easier to listen to the voice of God and distinguish it when I'm wanting to listen to the voice of God, right? Because, for example, when you call me, even if it was a different ID on the phone, you have a distinct voice, and I know it's you talking to me. And the more I talk to you, the more I'm like, "Oh, that's Adam. Oh, that's Adam." Or when someone calls me and pretends to be, I'm like, "Oh, that's not Adam. I know what I know what he sounds like." Yeah, it's the same thing talking to God. Well, God's talking to you.
You can even know who it is based on text because people text differently.
That's true.
It's not the sound; it's the phrasing. It's the way that we point to things. Right?
Yeah, but the more we have a relationship, the more even in text messages, like, this doesn't sound like you, right? And it's the same thing for God. We're talking about recognizing the call of God and in his voice. The more you learn to listen to it, the more you'll recognize it. Which will also mean that there's more chances to hear what he's calling you to say or calling you to do, and you may choose to say no. You might refuse it, but I think God's always calling us. This is why we talk about next steps here at our church. You are always called to a next step. God has called you into a next season, a next step to do something. We have to be willing to be obedient to take that next step. Yeah. But if I keep talking about this, we'll never get through the questions. So let's go to the next question.
Number three.
But we should talk about this sometime. If you want to talk about this, I'm very passionate about this lately. Number 3, what are some of the mechanisms God could use to speak to us? I think we kind of answered that a little bit by accident, but you did a little bit.
We kind of did a little bit, my wife speaks, to me, and I hear God through her a lot,
Mm-hmm.
Actually, my moving to Carl Junction to be on staff to lead here at the church, that was God calling me resisting it, rejecting it, and my wife saying, I think maybe God's doing something here. And he uses people, he uses his word, the Bible, he uses our surroundings, all these things.
I think a quick point, and we'll move on, but that you pointed out, and I pointed out earlier, when you are in a godly marriage, and a marriage that both of you are following after Jesus and you're both disciples, he uses each other. Yeah. So I know that if Grace was sitting here, she'd say the same thing. God speaks through my husband. We're team players together, and God uses our spouse to help us hear the call too, and to solidify things. So that's just an encouragement that if you're not talking to your spouse about these things, you need to start talking to your spouse about these, dialoguing about what God might be calling you as a family to do together. If you don't know how to do that, we'd love to talk to you about that. Last question. Go around the circle table.
It's a table.
It's a circle table, right? Go around and tell others what you see in them or how they can draw people to Jesus by leveraging their gifts, their resources, and their abilities.
Well, this gets weird. You're gonna watch us
speak to each other.
What was it again?
Bingo. Go around the circle. So hey, as he's reading this, I would actually highly recommend that if you're listening to this and you're not with your family, or maybe your oikos or something like that, you should pull this up sometime and talk to them. So if you're listening to this on our podcast, or if you're listening to it at work on your lunch break, come back to this question and make sure you do this with some people in your life.
So, Keenan, I have joked with you for a long time. Now, I'm going to tell them the joke real quick, all right? So
okay.
That's in context,
that makes more sense that way. So.
I have joked because I don't know how well you know Keenan outside of church Sunday mornings and the whole things. But Keenan, you used to have a knack for getting stuff, right? You have a knack for getting stuff. You have connections, and I'll mention something. You're like, I don't know. I think I know a guy that has that. I'll go find it, and I'll go look for that. And so I have joked for how many? I've known you for 10 years now. That,
now I know where we're going with this joke.
If you and I ever went to jail together for whatever reason, you'd be the guy that gets the smokes. All right,
I got you.
You're the guy that gets the things that I would need. And
I know the people.
Not that I smoke. I don't know why that.
But we would leverage those things.
You would leverage them to get the things. That's how it works on all TV shows that have jails in them, I think. So I've never been in jail. There's that. Here's the thing, though. You have this personality that just draws people in to everything, and you connect the dots in every aspect of your life, everywhere. And I've watched the last 10 years as you've been growing and leveraging that for Jesus and pointing him to the kingdom.
Yeah. I think for you, and this is something we've talked about before, so I'm just actually sharing some things that you get to hear that we talk about in our offices. For Adam, like, you do a phenomenal job of walking into a situation and seeing what our next steps we need to take. How can we build upon what God has given us to a better future for God? Not everyone has that gifting. Some people don't have that gifting. Some people, I'm a connections person. Adam is a future thinking person, has a beautiful gift God's given him that he's learned and grown in over the course of his life, and he's still growing in, right? And I think you do that. You've done that not only here, but I love listening to you talk about how the different people in your life that have called you and asked you, like, hey, how do you do this? How do you do this? And you just walk through, this is how I did it. And then you don't leave people alone, which I also appreciate about you, is those people that he gives advice to, he doesn't say, good luck, hope it works. There's a follow-up, and he walks through them with that, leading to that place. So that's what we see in each other. Again, I would encourage you, you need to talk to each other. I've said it every week, and I hope that you're like, why do you keep saying this? Because it's true. If you're not talking about these things with someone else, I'm going to be blunt right now. You're kind of wasting your time. I know, that sounds mean, but it's true. Because here's the deal. You can wrestle through this on your own, but discipleship and disciple making happens in the context of relationships with other people. And just like we talked about on Sunday, you could read this and it's good, but it's sweeter. It is better if you are processing these things with other people, because the things that you are thinking about, the things that you are wrestling through, might exactly be the thing that someone else needs to hear that God is wrestling through in your life, and you are withholding that gift from them by not talking about these things.
Yeah. You might have heard me say before, I know you have for sure, I love gathering for church. I love Sunday mornings. I look forward to Sunday mornings from about noon on Sunday till the next Sunday morning. I love it. I enjoy preaching. I enjoy being with the family of God. But Sunday mornings are not where we make disciples. It's not where we grow as disciples. It's where we get encouraged by the support of others. We get to encourage other people. We get challenged by something, inspired by something. We get to learn of next steps we can take. But we really actually grow in disciples when we're in circles of people. And those happen at Oikos, at midweek gatherings, Sunday school classes, Bible studies. If you're not in those smaller groups or smaller circles, then really you are just barely getting a taste of what Jesus wants for you and not the fullest of everything.
We want more for you.
Yeah.
Jesus wants more for you. We said that on Sunday, and this is how the more comes, by being in each other's lives. So if you're not living that out yet, but you're also like, I just don't know where to start, message us. Stop sitting on the sideline saying, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do. Your next step is to message one of us, and we will help you take that next step, because you need people. You need to connect to other people who will help you connect to Jesus and to his mission. So I hope that's actually an encouragement, not like a, wow, Keenan's angry at us. I'm not angry. I don't want you to miss out. It's an awesome thing to be a part of. And once you've tasted it, you're like, man, I don't want to go back. And that's what I want for you. I've tasted it, and a lot of people in our church are tasting it, but I don't think all of us are tasting this community life and what God has called us to do and what he can do through other people in our lives. And I want you to experience that, because I know that Jesus wants you to as well. Church, as always, until we see each other again, you are sent.